So the global backdrop, I think, is that US policy has had a clear impact on climate-related investment decisions. We've been seeing investors maybe looking for opportunities beyond the US. Amid all this, countries recognize that the climate threat is an existential one. And Malaysia has stayed the course. It has an ambitious green goal of net zero by 2050 and doubling the renewable energy, more than double, to 70% of the mix by then. Amid all this, Bursa Malaysia has been tasked with facilitating this national energy transition and also balancing the regulatory aspects along with the needs of investors at the same time. So let's discuss. Fad'l, great to have you up on stage.
Thank you, Avril, for having me here. Thank you.
Let's start with the global temperature, excuse the pun, towards the climate agenda that's cooled a little bit. What do you see as Bursa Malaysia's role in facilitating the energy transition?
I think very clearly for us, we want to see our companies look at sustainability from an impact and competitiveness perspective. And I think for us, all our companies have ESG rating. We use the FTSE methodology. Very clearly, we want them to have very clear baselines. And I think for Bursa Malaysia, the focal point is a couple of folds. Number one is reporting. So we want to ensure that we align to global standards, which we have. We will see companies coming out, the larger ones coming out in 2025, aligning to ISSB standards. The smaller companies a bit later. We will be phasing that out quite clearly. Number two, from a capacity building perspective, it's important for us to enable, this is an approach that needs to be cascaded across an organization. So firstly, we have the mandatory accreditation program, which is actually for directors. So tone from the top is very key in order for us to get this across. Number two, we've got a sustainability accelerator program, which is to help companies to understand in terms of alignment to some of the global standards that are being put forward. And thirdly, we also look at we have workshops, PLC transformation programs for sharings and for companies to be able to show best practices, etc., amongst each other. And lastly, of course, decarbonization. We have Bursa Carbon Exchange to be able to trade carbon credits and also, of course, to help sustainable projects being developed.
As you mentioned, disclosures are a key part of that. Can you share some of the numbers with us when it comes to public listed companies as well as the large non-listed ones? How has it progressed so far?
So for us, from a disclosure perspective, as I mentioned, we will clearly be phasing it out. We will be looking at about 130 companies on the first phase to align itself quite clearly to the ISSB standard under the National Sustainability Reporting Framework. And for 2025, the adoption will come through, but with assurances coming in 2027. And for the smaller companies and the rest of the companies into 2027 onwards.
So for the larger firms, can you talk to us about the percentage towards that goal? How much is currently on board already?
So I think quite clearly a lot of the larger companies, they are already aligned. A lot of companies are, very, very, very comfortably to say in terms of the larger companies are 70-80% aligned to some of the global standards already.
Okay. The smaller ones,
yes.
How on board are they? I mean, they face other challenges, including cost outlays.
Yeah, so mid-markets, and I would call them the SMEs and the mid-markets, I think they will need a lot more support. Quite clearly, they won't have, in terms of the capabilities, the ability to look at target setting, data collection, third-party assurances. So I think those are going to be some of the challenges that some of the mid-markets are going to have. But for Bursa Malaysia, we've always been supportive, and in terms of companies that are listed, we cover all segments. So quite clearly, we have a large pool of companies which are listed on our ACE markets, for example, and these are mid-market companies. And by virtue of them being listed on Bursa Malaysia, they are already on the sustainability journey. So all those bits that I mentioned to you in terms of getting them to, to have reporting alignments to global standards. So that will start for them also once they're listed. They will also have the ability to be part of all the capacity building, which will come through that Bursa will be able to support.
But what else do you think can be done to support the smaller companies?
I think a lot of engagements will be required, quite clearly, which is why under one of our programs, we have the PLC transformation program, where we do a lot of workshops, sharing engagement, the larger companies, the bigger companies. And I think there's a lot of networks that can be tapped upon to ensure that a lot of sharing in terms of how things are being done better. And I think the end objective about all this is two things. Number one, to help the mid-markets to capture pools of capital, green financing, sustainability type financing, and to grow. And secondly, to help them to be able to access global supply chains. That's key.
What about capital being allocated for the energy transition? I mean, we saw last year, I think in terms of Sukuk issuance, it was 12 billion ringgit. That was a 9-fold increase. How far are you to sort of achieving that goal?
I think the thing about for Malaysia, very clearly, we've set out a national energy transition policy. And I think if we look at the data and the numbers required, it's about 200 to 220 billion ringgit required by 2030. And I think the bit here is that a lot of these projects are going to be long gestation type projects. They're not going to be, 5-year type financing. It's going to be 15-year type financing. And I think you will need to use capital markets to help that. And we are very fortunate. We have a pretty deep Sukuk bond market to be able to support that. And at the back of that, we've got a lot of investors who continue to look at sustainable assets as part of their mandate. And as you will know, some of our government-linked entities, government-linked investment corporations, the GLICs, such as PNB, have put out commitment out there that they will be deploying up to 10 billion ringgit by 2030 into green assets and sustainable assets.
Some say that for Malaysia to achieve its climate commitments, it needs to accelerate the development of its carbon exchange. Since taking over in March,
yes.
What has been your assessment of the progress that's been made in the past few years?
I think for us, we established the carbon exchange at the end of 2022. We did the first trade in 2023. This clearly is a new economic growth area for Malaysia. And I think it's about how do we actually, credits are to help reduce emission levels and at the same time help companies to be able to support projects, sustainable type projects. And I think for us, since I've joined, quite clearly we see the carbon exchange and the carbon markets developing going forward. We are seeing Malaysia is at the cusp of in the development of its regulatory framework. We will be seeing the introduction of a Climate Change Act and a carbon market policy. And I think that will actually help us to see the introduction of ETS, which is the emissions trading scheme, and also carbon tax for certain sectors. So this will quickly start the development of potentially carbon credits to be traded. And I think, even within, from a regional perspective, there's a lot of collaboration being undertaken to set out a common carbon framework, which is to be able to apply interoperability of carbon credits across the markets.
Is that going to be enough to perhaps allay some concerns about the quality of the carbon credits?
Well, I think that's going to come out at the end of the day. There will be harmonization, standards, and I think that'll naturally come as the markets develop.
What else do you think maybe can be done to further address maybe some concerns about transparency or accessibility
In terms of?
when it comes to the quality of carbon credits?
I think one key bit is, of course, is capacity building in this space. And I think we need to be able to go out there to be able to engage with investors, market participants, and to build out this market quite quickly, because I think the understanding and depth of carbon credits and carbon markets, that's certainly an area of focus that we'll need to be...
That we're working towards.
Absolutely.
Talk to us about the broader markets. I mean, we've seen the KLCI last year was among the star performers in Southeast Asia, and this year it's among the bottom performers globally. And there are concerns from investors about the impact from tariffs, growing concerns also about political instability in Malaysia. What do you see as the impact on the local market?
I think tariffs inevitably will change the way companies do business. And I think it will reshape in terms of global supply chains. That's inevitable. But I think it will open up new opportunities for partnerships, for collaborations, and I think that will create a lot more innovation for companies. So for Bursa, I think we remain optimistic. We are optimistic. Quite clearly, Malaysia's economic fundamentals are intact. We see GDP growth 4 to 4.8% for 2025. KLCI is trading at a 17% discount to its 10-year average. We are also seeing very strong liquidity because a lot of the funds are sitting on cash. And I would see that they're sitting on cash.
Waiting to be unlocked.
Exactly. and sitting on cash at the highest amount since January 2024. So we will be seeing a lot of those liquidity coming back into the market.
When
quite
exactly?
quickly.
When do you think trading
So I would sense that, in my view, for a lot of the asset managers to be able to capture the cycle, I think when valuations are low is when you come in, and of course to be able to capture the cycles when markets are on the upside, and I think Bank Negara also recently reduced interest rates by 25 basis points. And I think quite clearly we will see a lot more liquidity coming into the system. So yes, I'm super optimistic about Malaysia's second half 2025.
Do you think roughly this is going to be a fourth quarter or a third quarter kind of story?
We'll probably see traction coming through within the fourth quarter onwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about how ripe you think market conditions? When are we going to see that materially changing for big IPOs to take place?
So I think for Malaysia, we've had a good run. So last year we had 55 IPOs. Out of 55, we had 40 companies thereabouts listed on the ACE market. And these are genuine, what I would call mid-market companies looking for equity capital. When you go to a bank, you want to raise capex. Banks are always going to ask you, so what's the equity portion that you're going to put in? So skin in the game is always important for the company. So I think at the end of the day, these are real capital coming through to help mid-markets company grow. And Bursa Malaysia has successfully done that. And we continue to do that. So for last year, we had 55 IPOs. This year, we're targeting 60 IPOs. And we've already crossed our halfway mark. We're at 38 IPOs as of yesterday. So we will continue to see IPOs coming through. Saying that, important for us to also see large IPOs come through. And IPOs, at the end of the day, I used to be an investment banker. It's all about sizing, pricing, and timing. And I think you need to price right to be able to get your investors to come through very quickly to raise capital. And I think for large IPOs, I mean, you will read in the news there's one sizable one potentially coming through towards the end of this year. If that comes through, that will be certainly a great milestone, a great large IPO coming through for Malaysia this year.
How else do you think large companies can be encouraged to list in Malaysia?
So there are a couple of things that we're looking at. One area for sure is to look at potentially secondary listings. We want to be able to see companies, and we want to have regional companies looking at secondaries potentially coming into Malaysia. So that's one. The other one is, of course, as we drive the conversation earlier on energy transition, we will see companies within that space looking at capturing the capital markets, and some of these will be the large companies. As they build out, as projects have actually come through, where there are sustainable cash flow generative income, they will be looking at the capital markets to IPO. So that's the second area. The third area, as you know, Malaysia has been actively pushing and driving in terms of the semiconductor space. So there are a lot of players within the semiconductor ecosystem that are also ripe, and we can actually take them out, bring them out into the capital markets to list them. So these are some of the very core areas that we've been pushing.
I just want to round out this conversation. I mean, when you look at the ESG-linked assets, and we've been discussing this off stage as well, what are you seeing in terms of flows into Malaysia, in terms of demand, liquidity?
I think at the end of the day, we see LPs and investors continue to focus and to grow their ESG assets. And that drives through across into mandates to asset managers. And I think if you look at data points up to the end of 2024, last year, we've seen it's quadrupled to 3.2 trillion in terms of assets that are looking for sustainable assets, ESG assets. And ASEAN, we're certainly ripe for it. We are a very, from an ASEAN perspective, we're pretty fossils-based. We're pretty, so there'll be a need for us to transition into low carbon type. So there'll be a need to drive for ESG projects or to move into more sustainable type projects. And I think companies will need to, look at carbon, clearly to reduce carbon type projects. So there will be a drive towards that. And I think the demand for ESG assets will continue. And I've said earlier that for Malaysia, there's clear commitment coming through from our asset managers.
And that's only increased this year from the last.
And that's continued to increase.
Okay. Fad'l, really good to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your plans for Bursa Malaysia with us, especially when it relates to sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Avril.
Fad'l and Avril, thank you so much. That brings us to the end of our morning plenary program, but we are certainly not done yet, and we have a lot going on this afternoon. We're about to head into our lunch break, so if you are pre-registered for our Powering Progress Roundtable, that is hosted by presenting sponsor Schneider Electric, that's about to begin, so please make your way to Clover 5. When you're leaving this room, it's going to be over to your right. Everybody else, we have a fantastic buffet lunch just outside this room, so please enjoy. And if you are registered to attend our deep dive sessions, those are going to begin at 1 p.m. over in Clover 6, which is on this side. We'll be back here in the plenary at 2 p.m. We have a lot of wonderful conversations on everything from AI, Capital Land CFO Paul Tam, MUFG's Colin Chen, and you can ask all of your burning questions on COP30 and COP31 to our Bloomberg Green journalists. So we will see you back here then. Thank you. you.